For these 6 people, entitlement wasn't just an attitude, it was a way of life that consumed their every waking moment. But their reign of terror was about to come to a shocking end. These are the stories of Karens who pushed too far and paid the ultimate price. It was September 12, 2015, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Sunset Ridge, an exclusive gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona. The 4,200-square-foot clubhouse buzzed with tension as nearly 80 residents filed into the main conference room, their voices creating an anxious murmur that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The smell of fresh coffee from the hospitality station mixed with the faint scent of desert sage that drifted through the open windows. Patricia Whitfield adjusted her reading glasses one final time as she surveyed the crowd from behind the mahogany podium, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving despite the gentle breeze from the air conditioning. At 52, the tyrannical HOA president had spent 6 years transforming the once peaceful community into her personal kingdom of rules and regulations. Her day job as a high-end real estate agent provided the income to support her obsessive lifestyle, but controlling her neighbors had become her true calling. Patricia carried a measuring tape and digital camera everywhere, documenting violations with the precision of a crime scene investigator. Her daily patrol routes covered every inch of the community's 240 acres, and she maintained detailed files on each of the 156 households. Residents had learned to peek through their curtains before stepping outside, knowing that Patricia might be lurking nearby with her citation book. Her aggressive enforcement had pushed several families into costly disputes over fines and legal fees. The Hendersons eventually sold their home after repeated citations over minor property issues escalated into thousands of dollars in penalties. Another family left after a prolonged conflict over landscaping rules, leaving neighbors wary of Patricia's zero-tolerance approach. Patricia took immense pride in her zero-tolerance policy and frequently boasted to other HOA presidents about maintaining the highest property values in Maricopa County. She had called tonight's special meeting to discuss her latest crusade: new restrictions that would ban all outdoor holiday decorations and limit pet ownership to 1 small dog per household. The meeting began with Patricia's characteristic intensity as she clicked through her PowerPoint presentation, each slide detailing new violations she had discovered and the corresponding fines she planned to implement. Her voice grew more shrill as residents began questioning her authority, their frustration evident after years of living under her oppressive rule. Patricia raised her voice as she pointed to photos of Halloween displays, insisting they lowered property values. She then turned to pet owners, blaming large dogs for the constant noise. To drive her point home, she stepped onto a chair at the front of the room. The frame shifted unsteadily beneath her weight as she continued addressing the crowd. Without warning, one of the chair's legs gave way. Patricia fell backward, her head striking the stone fireplace hearth with a sharp crack that silenced the room. The impact fractured her neck instantly, and she collapsed to the floor without movement. Blood began pooling around Patricia's head as shocked residents fumbled for their phones to call 911. She lay motionless, still clutching her violation citation book, her final words having been threats about implementing $100 daily fines for Christmas decorations. The paramedics arrived within 12 minutes, but Patricia Whitfield was pronounced dead at the scene. The HOA dissolved within 6 months, as residents voted overwhelmingly to eliminate the oppressive rules Patricia had implemented. Property values actually increased once the community became known for its welcoming atmosphere rather than strict regulations. The clubhouse fireplace was removed and replaced with a memorial garden promoting community harmony, though few mourned Patricia's passing. It was March 8, 2014, and the mild evening air carried the sounds of clinking glasses and animated conversation through the historic district of Charleston, South Carolina. Giuseppe's Italian restaurant hummed with activity as nearly 60 diners enjoyed their meals in the elegantly appointed dining room, the soft lighting from crystal chandeliers creating an intimate atmosphere. The aroma of garlic and fresh basil filled the air, mixing with the subtle scent of aged wine from the restaurant's extensive collection. Brenda Pemberton adjusted her designer reading glasses as she surveyed the menu with the calculating gaze of someone preparing for battle. At 47, the insurance claims adjuster had built a notorious reputation throughout Charleston's restaurant scene as a serial complainer who turned every dining experience into an opportunity for confrontation and compensation. Her pattern of exaggerated grievances and threats of lawsuits had made her a dreaded customer at establishments across the Southeast. Restaurant managers throughout Charleston knew Brenda by name and would often comp her meals preemptively to avoid the lengthy confrontations that could last for hours and disrupt their other customers. Her insurance background had taught her exactly which complaints would generate the fastest results and how to phrase her grievances to suggest potential liability issues that restaurant owners feared most. Brenda had developed a systematic approach to her restaurant complaints, always arriving with a mental list of potential issues she could exploit. She understood how to escalate minor service problems into major incidents that would result in free meals, cash settlements, or both. Local restaurant staff had learned to recognize her tactics, but many establishments still found it easier to appease her than to deal with the scenes she would create. Tonight's target was Giuseppe's, an upscale establishment she had been planning to visit for months. She arrived with her usual arsenal of potential complaints, having researched the restaurant's online reviews to identify service issues that other customers had mentioned. Her goal was ambitious: a full refund plus additional compensation for what she would claim was unacceptable treatment. Brenda began her usual routine immediately, loudly criticizing the bread temperature and demanding to speak with the manager before her appetizer arrived. When manager Tony Ricci politely offered to replace her meal, Brenda escalated the situation by throwing her wine glass against the wall, the crystal shattering as it struck the exposed brick. She stood on her chair to address the entire dining room, shouting accusations about the restaurant's service and demanding satisfaction for her treatment. In her dramatic performance, she gestured wildly with her arms while berating the staff and threatening legal action against the establishment. During her theatrical display, Brenda knocked over a large decorative wine barrel that had been positioned near her table as part of the restaurant's rustic Italian theme. The empty oak barrel, used purely for decoration but improperly secured to its base, tipped forward from her movement and rolled toward the wall. The barrel struck Brenda's torso and pinned her against the brick surface. The impact fractured several ribs and compressed her chest cavity, preventing her from breathing properly. Witnesses said she gasped once before collapsing to the floor. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but she was unresponsive and later pronounced dead at the scene. Emergency medical personnel arrived quickly, but were unable to revive her. The restaurant faced a wrongful death lawsuit from Brenda's family, though security footage clearly documented her aggressive behavior leading up to the accident. Other local establishments came forward with evidence of her pattern of fraudulent complaints, creating a complex legal situation. The lawsuit was ultimately unsuccessful, but Giuseppe's installed safety barriers around all decorative items and implemented staff training for handling difficult customers. Brenda's death became a cautionary tale in Charleston's restaurant community about the dangers of escalating customer service disputes. It was November 15, 2016, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves across the parking lot of Maple Grove Elementary School in Minnesota. The school auditorium buzzed with tension as nearly 150 parents, teachers, and board members filled the folding chairs, their voices creating an anxious murmur that echoed off the 20-foot ceiling. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the institutional beige walls decorated with student artwork. Susan Hutchinson adjusted her stack of printed research articles as she prepared for what she considered her most important presentation yet. At 49, the pharmaceutical sales representative had become a familiar presence at every school board meeting over the past 3 years. Known for her persistence and increasingly forceful positions, she often cited medical terminology and research articles to support her arguments. Her background in pharmaceutical sales lent her authority when she spoke, though her interpretations of the studies she referenced were often incomplete. Over time, her advocacy campaigns led to several staff departures and curriculum changes, prompting concern among teachers and administrators. What began as parent involvement gradually grew into a cycle of conflict that left the school community divided. Her latest crusade involved demanding the complete removal of all technology from classrooms, claiming that Wi-Fi signals caused irreversible brain damage in developing children. She had spent weeks preparing tonight's presentation, complete with cherry-picked studies and inflammatory rhetoric designed to terrify other parents into supporting her cause. Susan's own children had become increasingly isolated as other families avoided association with her extremist views. Teachers walked on eggshells around her kids, afraid that any perceived slight would trigger another of Susan's explosive confrontations with the administration. As Susan began her impassioned speech about the dangers of wireless technology, her voice grew increasingly shrill and her gestures more erratic. She had been experiencing severe chest pains and shortness of breath for weeks, but attributed her symptoms to the school's wireless network, rather than the chronic stress of her constant outrage. She raised her voice, waving papers frantically, and insisting Wi-Fi signals were harming children. Her face had turned bright red, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool evening temperature, as she continued her presentation about the alleged dangers of wireless technology. Suddenly, Susan clutched her chest with both hands, her eyes widening in terror as crushing pain radiated down her left arm. She stumbled backward from the podium, her breathing turned shallow. Between strained gasps, she repeated that the Wi-Fi was making her sick before collapsing onto the auditorium floor as board members and parents rushed to help. She suffered a massive heart attack linked to chronic hypertension and stress. Despite the quick response of paramedics, Susan Hutchinson was pronounced dead at Maple Grove Hospital at 9:23 p.m., her final words being demands that the Wi-Fi was killing her. The autopsy revealed severe coronary artery disease exacerbated by chronic stress and hypertension. Her group faded, and the board emphasized respectful debate at future meetings. The school board also established a mental health awareness program for parents struggling with education-related anxiety. It was December 23, 2017, and the holiday shopping frenzy filled the air at Pioneer Place Mall in Portland, Oregon. The Nordstrom department store buzzed with last-minute shoppers as nearly 200 customers navigated the crowded aisles, their voices creating a symphony of holiday stress and excitement. The scent of expensive perfume from the cosmetics counter mixed with the aroma of cinnamon from the nearby food court. Linda Blackwood wheeled her shopping cart toward the customer service counter with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. At 44, the mortgage broker had developed a pattern of fraudulent returns over the past several years, purchasing items, using them extensively, then returning them with fabricated complaints and demands for compensation. Linda had become a known problem customer at multiple retailers throughout the Pacific Northwest, with store employees learning to recognize her frequent attempts to return obviously used merchandise. She had been banned from several stores but continued her schemes by shopping at different locations and using various excuses for her returns. Her cart contained clearly used items, a designer handbag with visible wear marks, shoes that had obviously been worn outdoors, and clothing with deodorant stains and missing tags. Linda had prepared an elaborate story about receiving defective merchandise as gifts, complete with fake receipts and manufactured outrage. The customer service manager, Jennifer Walsh, recognized Linda immediately from previous encounters and reports from other stores. The store had been documenting her fraudulent activities for months, building a case with security footage and coordination with other retailers. Tonight would mark the end of Linda's return scam operation. When Jennifer politely refused the return of the clearly damaged designer handbag, Linda's carefully constructed facade crumbled instantly. Her face contorted with rage as she began shouting threats and accusations, her voice carrying across the entire store. Other customers backed away as Linda's tantrum escalated into violence. She shouted accusations across the store and threatened legal action against the company. In her fury, she began grabbing merchandise from nearby displays and hurling it at the customer service counter. Linda seized a heavy crystal vase from a holiday display, raising it above her head with both hands. Linda hurled the vase toward Jennifer's head, but the manager ducked behind the counter just in time. The heavy crystal struck the wall and shattered on impact. A large fragment deflected off the surface and hit Linda on the side of the neck, severing a major artery. She pressed her hand to the wound and collapsed among the merchandise as blood pooled across the floor. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but she was pronounced dead at the scene while shocked shoppers looked on. Security footage revealed the full extent of Linda's return fraud scheme, leading to a posthumous investigation that uncovered tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent returns. Multiple retailers provided evidence of her activities, and her family discovered significant credit card debt that highlighted the scope of her fraudulent operations. It was July 4th, 2013, and the oppressive Florida heat shimmered off the asphalt of West Shore Plaza's parking lot in Tampa. The shopping center buzzed with holiday activity, as nearly 500 cars filled the sprawling lot, their occupants seeking air-conditioned relief from the 95-degree temperature. The smell of hot asphalt mixed with exhaust fumes and the distant aroma of barbecue from a nearby restaurant. Deborah Morrison adjusted her homemade parking enforcement badge as she surveyed the parking lot with the authority of a self-appointed monitor. At 51, the bank manager had developed an obsession with parking violations at the mall, carrying printed notices and a digital camera to document what she considered improper parking. Her behavior had cost her friendships and strained her marriage, but she refused to abandon what she saw as her duty. Deborah kept records of license plates and would call police to report violations, even when no actual laws had been broken. She had confronted numerous shoppers over the past 2 years, turning minor parking disputes into major confrontations that often required security intervention. Mall management had repeatedly asked her to stop, but she insisted she was providing a public service. Her latest targets were a young family loading groceries into their SUV. The Johnsons had parked legally within the designated lines, but Deborah believed they were too close to the cart return area, violating her personal interpretation of parking regulations. Deborah positioned herself directly behind their vehicle while taking photos of their license plate, shouting about parking violations and threatening to call police. The father, Mark Johnson, tried to ignore her while securing his children in their car seats, but Deborah's harassment continued to escalate. When Mark began backing out slowly, Deborah deliberately positioned herself behind the moving vehicle, refusing to move despite his warnings. She pounded on the rear window while continuing her complaints about parking violations, her face red with rage in the sweltering heat. The SUV's rear bumper struck Deborah as she moved closer to prevent their departure. The impact knocked her backward onto the concrete, and her head struck the curb. The sound echoed across the parking lot as witnesses called for help. But Deborah Morrison died from severe brain trauma. Security footage showed Deborah's aggressive behavior and deliberate positioning behind the moving vehicle. The driver was initially charged with vehicular manslaughter, but charges were dropped when witnesses testified about her actions. The mall hired professional parking attendants and installed additional security cameras following the incident. It was August 19, 2018, and the cool mountain air carried the sounds of urban life through the courtyard of Pine Ridge Apartments in Denver, Colorado. The 3-story complex housed nearly 200 residents in 80 units, their evening routines creating the normal symphony of apartment living. The scent of dinner preparations drifted from open windows, mixing with the fresh smell of recently watered landscaping. Margaret Daniels pressed her ear against the wall, separating her unit from her neighbors, her decibel meter registering the faint sound of a television at normal volume. At 46, the government clerk had developed an obsession with noise complaints, filing numerous formal grievances during her 2 years of residency. Her persistent complaints had resulted in several families moving out of the complex. Margaret documented sounds throughout the day, maintaining logs with timestamps and decibel readings. She would pound on walls and ceilings at various hours, demanding quiet from neighbors who were conducting normal daily activities. Her apartment contained multiple sound monitoring devices and stacks of complaint documentation. The upstairs neighbors, the Chen family, had endured months of Margaret's complaints about normal activities like walking across their floor and watching television at reasonable volumes. Tonight, their 8-year-old daughter was practicing piano at 7 p.m., well within the building's designated quiet hours that didn't begin until 10 p.m. Margaret became increasingly agitated as the piano music drifted through the ceiling. She grabbed her decibel meter and complaint forms, going upstairs to confront the family about what she considered excessive noise. Her pounding on their door echoed through the hallway, but the Chens had learned to ignore her complaints. Frustrated by their refusal to answer, Margaret retrieved a maintenance ladder from the storage closet and positioned it against the building's exterior wall. She planned to climb onto the Chen's second-floor balcony to continue her confrontation, bypassing their locked door. The wooden balcony railing, installed when the complex was built in 1987, had been weakened by 31 years of Colorado weather extremes. Freeze-thaw cycles had loosened the bolts, and recent heavy rains had rotted the support posts, though the damage wasn't visible from ground level. Margaret climbed the ladder with her complaint notebook tucked under her arm and her decibel meter hanging from her belt. At 5 feet 6 inches and 160 pounds, She represented a significant load for the compromised railing system. Other residents watched from their windows as she reached the balcony level, some recording the scene on their phones. Margaret pounded on the sliding glass door while the Chen family remained inside. She leaned her full weight against the railing to get closer to the window, applying pressure to the weakest section of the deteriorated structure. The railing gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtyard. Margaret fell 3 stories onto the concrete courtyard below, her body striking the pavement with an impact that could be heard throughout the complex. The fall created a loud disturbance that startled neighbors who had been sleeping peacefully despite her constant complaints about normal living sounds. She died instantly from multiple fractures and massive internal injuries, her decibel meter shattered beside her body. The apartment complex faced liability issues for the unsafe balcony railing that hadn't been properly maintained or inspected. A structural engineer's report revealed that multiple balconies throughout the property had similar deterioration, leading to a renovation project. Neighbors provided evidence of Margaret's harassment campaign, documenting her behavior toward families conducting normal daily activities. The Chen family moved out within a month following the incident. New building management implemented policies requiring mediation before eviction proceedings for noise complaints. They installed soundproofing in units with shared walls and established quiet hours that balanced residents' rights to both peace and normal living activities. The complex installed safety barriers around all balconies and implemented regular structural inspections. Margaret's apartment was converted into a community room where residents could resolve disputes through mediation. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.